Nancy Pelosi's Asia tour comes to an end. Beijing responds with military drills after her stop in Taiwan. Did the House Speaker's trip serve to defend U.S. values and interests, or has it dangerously escalated tensions in the region? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Nancy Pelosi's Asia tour. Her stops in Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan made the news, but Nancy Pelosi's highly controversial visit to Taiwan stole the global headlines. China warned her not to go. The White House expressed serious reservations, but as an independent member of the U.S. Congress, Pelosi forged ahead with her trip to Taipei. And not long after she left, Beijing sanctioned the House Speaker, as well as launched its largest ever military drills near the island. Missiles, warships, and fighter jets were all on display as China showed its military prowess. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen urged the international community to intervene and stop what it called Beijing's irrational military actions while vowing to protect her nation.
I would like to emphasize that we will not escalate conflicts or provoke disputes, but we will firmly defend our sovereignty and national security and stick to the line of defense of democracy and freedom.
Taiwan considers itself a sovereign state. China calls it a breakaway province, and Washington has a complicated stand when it comes to Taipei. Though it doesn't fully recognize the island's independence, it does consider it a separate democracy and sells them billions of dollars in weapons. And Nancy Pelosi says her trip was aimed at protecting that democracy, not altering the status quo.
You may be more interested in, again, what the Chinese did while we were traveling. And we have said from the start that our representation here is not about changing the status quo here in Asia, changing the status quo in Taiwan. It's about, again, the Taiwan Relations Act, the U.S.-China policy, all of the pieces of legislation and agreements that have established what our relationship is, to have peace in the Taiwan Straits and to have the status quo prevail.
But what really is the status quo if China sees a high-ranking U.S. official's visit to Taipei as a violation of its own sovereignty? And could Taiwan's precarious status become a flashpoint to drag other Asian neighbors into conflict with China? Joining me now to debate that are, from Beijing, Victor Gao. He's a former Chinese diplomat and Soochow University's chair professor. And from Canberra is John Blaxland, a professor of national security at the Australian National University. Thanks all so much for being with us. John Blaxland, let's start with the broader picture if we can, and I'll ask you if you think, Pelosi's tour of Asia was actually worth it. What did the U.S. gain here?
So I think this was largely about domestic U.S. politics and about positioning Pelosi for the midterm elections, and perhaps with a view to boosting President Joe Biden's prospects of success in retaining a Democrat majority in the Senate. Now, of course, having said that, we know that Nancy Pelosi has been a strong supporter of democracy and in China. She was very prominent back in 1991 at Tiananmen Square, unraveling a banner. She's been a strong advocate of Taiwan for many, many years as well. And her advocacy has grown more strident as President Xi's rhetoric has become more bellicose towards Taiwan. So there's a combination of factors here, that a degree of domestic politics personal belief, a little bit of positioning, and I think also a sense of wanting to test the waters as to just how strongly China would react to such a move, noting that it's been, a quarter of a century since Newt Gingrich did the same sort of thing back in 1997.
Very different China back then. But let me ask you, John, I mean, if you say it's about domestic U.S. politics, did it bode well for the Democratic Party if the president had indicated maybe this wasn't a good idea? The U.S. military chiefs said don't do it, but she went ahead anyway. You don't think it looks like a lack of unity among the Democratic Party? Could that not hurt somewhat?
Yeah, there's always a recognition inside the United States that the Congress and the executive, the presidential executive, while they might be from the same party, aren't necessarily always aligned. And in fact, there's some convenience at times, and I think this is one of those times when the gap between them is actually, it works to their advantage because the president can say this is at arm's length, and even though he might actually gain something from this. But it's very interesting, the blowback now with the exercises that are going on. My sense is that this is actually making China look kind of a bit like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. What kind of country starts firing missiles in international waters and on the edges of an exclusive economic zone, threatening into near the waters of Japan, near the waters of the Philippines, conducting activities that's clearly risky and dangerous, closing international airspace and so on. This is the behavior of somebody who's perhaps a little bit nervous and uncomfortable about their own position, I would suspect as well.
Victor Gao, I'll let you answer that. What kind of country does that?
Well, China is the country which values its sovereignty and territorial integrity very much. And China is a country that will defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity to the hilt. There will be no reservation or no hesitation for China to do that with the utmost of its capabilities and resources. China views Nancy Pelosi as troublemaker-in-chief of the world because her visit to Taiwan was only for the purpose of encouraging separatism and independence. She was treating Taiwan as a separate country, and she wanted to tear Taiwan away from China. How can China hesitate to do anything which would allow Taiwan to be torn away from the motherland? Therefore, I think whatever China is doing in terms of sanctions against her and her family members, and also sanctions against the United States government, decisions not to cooperate with the United States on a whole cross range of issues, for example, are from this position that China is the victim of this kind of hollowing out and invalidating the one China policy. And China wants to do whatever it can to send the message to whoever who wants to promote Taiwan independence that their effort will be futile.
And that message has been so far this unprecedented military activity now in the Taiwan Strait. But tell us if you think the worst is behind us now, or will we see more from China's response, potentially more dangerous escalatory activity?
I think China wants to promote peaceful reunification since the beginning of the 1980s, and this remains China's top priority regarding Taiwan. China does not want to use force to solve this problem of national reunification. However, there is a precondition. That is, those people in Taiwan who want to promote Taiwanese independence will not go beyond the point of no return. And then countries like the United States will not go out of their way to encourage Taiwanese independence and treat Taiwan as if it is a sovereign country. Now, on these two conditions, I think China will be perfectly happy to abide by the time, and then time is actually on China's side because China is growing and the economic cooperation between China's mainland and Taiwan is growing. Its trade volume is up to about $200 billion US, and Taiwan actually achieved a surplus of more than $60 billion in its trade with counterparts on the Chinese mainland. Therefore, I think China has all the reason to maintain peace and stability in the cross-strait relations. But Pelosi is pouring fuel onto the fire. She was encouraging Taiwanese independence. I think no country in the world, in their right sense of the word, would tolerate this kind of interference.
Okay. John, quickly, I see you had a response. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is China getting angry about a liberal democracy, a prosperous liberal democracy emerging on its doorstep. It has suppressed dissent in Hong Kong. The one nation, two systems, the idea of a separate kind of democratic political model being sustainable in Hong Kong has been snuffed out. That was possibly a model for enticing Taiwan in. That game has been given up. So instead of carrots, we're seeing sticks. President Xi he's commonly almost given up entirely on the idea of attracting anybody to China. It's become odious in its behavior. The wolf warrior diplomacy, the exercise of sharp power, does everything to dispel interest in joining China. This is not the behavior of somebody who's grown up.
I'll tell you what, John, I want to go back to the wider issue here. I mean, we know that this Asia tour was very much overshadowed by the visit to Taiwan, but still there were other nations at play in this dynamic. Singapore, for example, said there are more intelligent ways to give Taiwan the support it needs, referring to Pelosi's controversial visit. So does that statement, do you think, indicate, in a way, how much other Asian nations might fear being pulled into a conflict not of their own making?
Look, there's considerable nervousness, absolutely. Singapore is leading the charge in terms of nervousness, but they've been a very strong supporter of the United States and its engagement in Asia. But it's perfectly understandable that these countries are trying to find a happy medium because China is important to all of us. It's a leading trading partner for Australia, for Singapore, for Taiwan as well, of course. No one wants this to get out of hand. But I think there's a degree of discomfort with the way China is behaving. And it's not just what we've seen in the last 24 or 48 hours. It's the way they've been behaving for the last few years. It's incredibly unsettling. The way they've approached, really very disrespectfully, their neighbours in the South China Sea, riding roughshod over the exclusive economic zones that the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea clearly mandates to Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, and so on. And we are big, you are small. It's this kind of arrogant, but almost insecure approach to managing international relations, that if I shout more loudly, if I fire more guns, enough people will be afraid of me. Well, who wants to live in a world where that's the top that's the top power? The bottom line is that, you would have thought that they would have learned that soft power is more attractive, and in the long run, that's more effective than being threatened by the end of a gun, at the barrel of a gun. This adversarial approach that China is taking is completely counterproductive. Yes, of course, Singapore's wary. Everybody's wary.
Beijing certainly disagrees, but let me put that to Victor, because it's not just Taiwan feeling somewhat threatened by China's military action now. Japan has said that an unprecedented 5 of 9 missiles fired from China landed in its exclusive economic zone. And, this is a country who's now reconsidered reversing decades of a pacifist stance to one of militarization. Should China...
Absolutely.
Victor, do you think China perhaps needs to consider more of its neighbors' sentiments in what it does re-Taiwan?
Thank you very much. Allow me to make some very quick points. Japan said Chinese missiles fired into its EEZs. From the Chinese perspective, we do not recognize the legitimacy of such EEZs. Why? Because there is a territorial dispute involving Diaoyu Island, which in Japan they call it Senkaku Island. Therefore, if you use Diaoyu Island as the baseline, then
right, we know that there is a dispute, but still this is manifesting in more confrontation with yet another neighbor in the region. I guess the question comes down to, does China have allies now in the region? Does it care?
North Korea?
First of all,
go ahead, Victor.
First of all, with due respect, allow me to make one point. You ask this question to a country with 1.4 billion people, and the population is larger than all the OECD countries' populations combined. I think China's philosophy is always stand firm on matters of principle and defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And then if anyone wants to encroach upon China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, China will do nothing but to fight to the hilt. This is the message of China. This is not being aggressive. This is really standing firm to defend China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. I hope the rest of the world will get the message. Don't mess around with China as far as sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Bully boy behaviour is really not the way of the future. Two older ladies, Nancy Pelosi and Tsai Ing-wen, met in Taiwan. That is a threat to China. Seriously, this speaks to grave insecurity on President Xi's part, and also an embarrassment that a liberal democracy is thriving on its doorstep. That, to me, is what this is about. Otherwise, President Xi would come up with a very different approach to woo Taiwan. This approach is completely turning the world against China. Why do this, President Xi? Victor, come on. What's the benefit of this bully boy muscular behaviour? It's unhelpful.
Victor, I would love to give you a final word, but very unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment of Newsmakers. I'd like to thank you both, Victor Gao, John Blaxland, so much for being with us. Greatly appreciated.